Think your school rules are strict? Medieval laws were completely insane. These 10 bizarre rules were totally normal back then, but would land you in serious trouble today. Get ready for a journey through the craziest legal system in history. And let's start with how to determine you're innocent. Imagine being accused of stealing a loaf of bread in medieval times. Instead of evidence, witnesses, or a fair trial, the judge hands you a red-hot iron rod and says, "Hold this." If your hand doesn't get infected in 3 days, congratulations, you're innocent. Welcome to the completely bonkers world of trial by ordeal, where your innocence was determined by how well you survived torture. Trial by ordeal came in several fun varieties. The most popular was trial by fire, where the accused would carry burning iron or walk across hot coals. If your burns healed cleanly within days, God had obviously protected you, proving your innocence. If they got infected, which in a world without antibiotics was almost guaranteed, well, clearly you were guilty because infected wounds are the most reliable sign of criminal behavior. Then there was trial by water, where they'd tie you up and throw you into a lake. The logic here was truly mind-boggling. If you sank, you were innocent because the pure water accepted you. If you floated, you were guilty because the water rejected you. You either drowned or burned at the stake. Congratulations on your innocence. Too bad you're dead. For nobles, there was trial by combat, where your innocence depended on your fighting skills. The belief was that God would strengthen the arm of the innocent. So if you won the fight, you must be innocent. Never mind if the other guy was twice your size, God apparently prefers the innocent who also happened to be good with swords. These ordeals weren't rare oddities. They were the actual legal system for hundreds of years across Europe. Court records show that between the 9th and 13th centuries, thousands of people faced these trials. In some regions, up to 20% of all criminal cases were settled by ordeal. The craziest part? The church was behind most of this, with priests overseeing the ordeals as divine judgments. It wasn't until 1215 that the Catholic Church finally banned clergy from participating in ordeals, which helped lead to more evidence-based trials. Speaking of strange rules about what you could and couldn't do, ever been told your outfit breaks the dress code? In medieval times, wearing the wrong clothes wasn't just unfashionable, it was illegal. Stop right there, peasant. That purple hat is reserved for nobles. That'll be a fine of 40 gold coins, which is only about your entire year's wages. Sumptuary laws controlled what people could wear based on their social rank. These weren't gentle suggestions. They were strict rules backed by harsh punishments. The fancier the material, the higher your rank needed to be to wear it legally. Want silk? Better be royalty. Fur trim? Hope you're at least a wealthy merchant. The medieval fashion police were ruthless, and they didn't care if purple really brought out your eyes. Colors were especially controlled. Purple dye came from rare sea snails and was so expensive that in many European kingdoms, only royalty could legally wear it. In England, a law from 1337 specified that only those with incomes above £100 yearly could wear certain furs or golden cloth. That's about $150,000 in today's money, just to wear a fluffy collar. These bizarre fashion laws existed across Europe, Asia, and beyond. Japan had some of the strictest rules, where even the pattern on your kimono was regulated by law. The most interesting part? These laws rarely worked. Court records show thousands of violations, proving people have always found ways to dress how they want. Why did rulers care so much about clothes? It wasn't just about looking good. In a world without ID cards or driver's licenses, your clothes instantly showed your place in society. When a peasant dressed like a noble, it threatened the entire social order. Heaven forbid someone might mistake a baker for a baron just because he splurged on some fancy buttons. The punishments were no joke. Fines, public humiliation, and sometimes even jail time awaited fashion rule breakers. In some Italian cities, women wearing excessive jewelry could have their treasures confiscated on the spot by officials who literally patrolled the streets looking for fashion crimes. While today anyone can wear whatever color they want, medieval life was full of these strict social rules. Time to come home. This phrase might sound like something your mom would yell, but in medieval times, it wasn't just your parents making you come inside after dark. It was the law. Medieval curfews weren't suggestions. They were strict rules that could land you in serious trouble if broken. When the sun went down in medieval towns, a bell would ring across the community. This wasn't just any bell, it was the curfew bell, and its sound meant one thing: everybody needed to get inside immediately. The word curfew actually comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover fire, because nothing says party's over like forcing everyone to put out their flames and sit in the dark. The rules were simple but harsh. After the bell rang, streets had to be completely empty. Anyone caught wandering around after curfew could face fines equal to a week's wages, be thrown in jail until morning, or even be publicly shamed. In some towns, repeat offenders could be put in the stocks, wooden frames that locked your head and hands in place while people threw rotten food at you. Nothing teaches you to respect bedtime like having a tomato thrown at your face. Why were these laws so strict? Fire was one major reason. Medieval towns were built mainly of wood, and a single unattended flame could burn down entire neighborhoods. Records from London show that between 1200 and 1400, the city experienced 23 major fires that each destroyed hundreds of buildings. Crime was another big concern. Without streetlights, medieval nights were pitch black, making them perfect for thieves and troublemakers. Town officials believed that forcing everyone inside would reduce nighttime crimes. Many towns hired night watchmen who patrolled the streets shouting out the time and looking for rule breakers. These poor guys basically had the worst job ever, walking around in the freezing dark, yelling 3 o'clock and all's well, while desperately hoping all actually was well. The craziest part? These curfews applied to everyone except the very wealthy and powerful. In many medieval towns, up to 90% of people had to follow curfew rules, while nobles could come and go as they pleased. Speaking of special treatment for the wealthy and powerful, medieval justice wasn't just unfair about when you could be outside. Medieval justice had a massive loophole that would make any modern lawyer's jaw drop. If you could prove you were connected to the church, you could escape regular punishment. This weird legal trick was called benefit of clergy, and it created a two-track justice system that favored anyone who could read Latin or even fake a connection to the church. How did it work? When someone was arrested for a crime, they could claim to be a church official. Since church members were supposed to be judged by church courts rather than regular courts, this claim could save your neck, literally. Church courts rarely use the death penalty, preferring punishments like prayer, fasting, or at worst, being fired from your church job. Your punishment for murder is 100 Hail Marys. Try to sound like you mean it this time. The test to prove you were part of the church was ridiculously simple: reading a short Bible passage in Latin, often Psalm 51. This became known as the neck verse because reading it successfully could save your neck from the hangman's noose. Since regular people couldn't read at all, this was supposed to identify real clergy. But here's the absurd part. Crafty criminals quickly figured out they could memorize this one passage without actually knowing how to read. Court records from 13th century England show that about 25% of all criminals claimed benefit of clergy, and most were granted it even though they clearly weren't priests. Imagine committing a serious crime today and getting off because you memorized one paragraph from a book. Yes, I robbed that bank, but I can recite the first page of Harry Potter, so I'm free to go, right? The system became so ridiculous that by the 1400s, authorities tried to limit the loophole. They started branding the thumbs of first-time offenders who used benefit of clergy, ensuring they couldn't use the same trick twice. Court records show one clever criminal who had been branded 7 different times, using different parts of his body to hide previous marks. Even more bizarre, women were initially excluded from claiming benefits of clergy, despite many nuns being more educated than male criminals who used the loophole. It wasn't until 1541 that women could finally use this legal trick. While claiming to be clergy might save you from regular courts, there was another way innocent people ended up in deadly trouble. The medieval justice system reached its peak of unfairness with witch trials, where normal human features could get you killed. Got a birthmark? Suspicious. Live alone with a cat? Definitely a witch. Talk to yourself sometimes? Better hope the witch hunters don't visit your town, or you'll be asked to explain why you're discussing potion recipes with your invisible demon friend. Witch trials operated on fear rather than facts. Between 1450 and 1750, courts across Europe executed between 40,000 and 60,000 people for witchcraft. The majority, roughly 80%, were women, often those who didn't fit neatly into society: widows, unmarried women, healers, or midwives. The proof used to identify witches was based on the wildest ideas. One common test involved looking for a witch's mark, any unusual spot on the skin that supposedly didn't feel pain when pricked with a needle. Court records describe witch prickers who made their living by jabbing accused witches with special needles. These needle experts sometimes used trick needles that retracted when pressed against skin, ensuring the witch felt no pain and could be declared guilty. Talk about a job that definitely wouldn't appear on career day. Another popular witch test was the swimming test. The accused would be tied up and thrown into water. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank and potentially drowned, they were innocent. Congratulations! Your death by drowning has proven you weren't a witch after all. Your family must be so relieved. The confession process was equally messed up. Accused witches were often tortured until they admitted to impossible things, like flying on broomsticks or turning people into frogs. One court record from 1622 describes a woman who confessed to causing storms, killing livestock, and dancing with the devil after 3 days of torture. When torture stopped, she recanted her confession, so they tortured her again until she reconfessed. Many towns became consumed by witch panic, where accusations spread like wildfire. In some German towns, the trials killed off almost all the women. Records from Würzburg show that in 1629, the town executed 19 accused witches in a single day. While fear of supernatural forces led to these deadly witch hunts, the law could also kill you for much more ordinary reasons. Wanted, dead, or alive, for the wicked crime of shooting one deer. This might sound like a joke, but medieval poaching laws were deadly serious. Hunting animals without permission could get you killed even if your family was starving. In medieval Europe, hunting wasn't a sport for everyone. It was a privilege reserved exclusively for nobility. Kings and lords claimed ownership of all wild animals on their land. These weren't just casual rules. They were formalized in harsh laws like the Forest Laws in England, which turned 1/3 of the entire country into protected royal hunting grounds by the 1200s. The punishments for breaking these laws were shockingly extreme. For killing a deer in the king's forest, you could face death by hanging, blinding, cutting off hands, castration, or massive fines that would bankrupt your family. A rabbit was worth more than a peasant's life. What's that? You stole a rabbit because your children were starving? Well, your execution is scheduled for Tuesday. We'd do it sooner, but we're busy hanging the guy who caught a pheasant. Court records from 1345 show that in just one English forest, over 200 people were arrested for poaching in a single year. Most were ordinary people trying to feed their families during food shortages. One record describes a man who was hanged for catching 3 rabbits during a famine. The most bizarre part of these laws was that they created special forest courts with their own rules and punishments, completely separate from regular courts. These courts had strange procedures like requiring accused poachers to hold hot iron if witnesses weren't available, bringing us right back to those trials by ordeals. Forest laws weren't just about protecting animals for sport. They were a way for the rich to control resources and keep the poor in their place. Noble hunters could kill dozens of deer in a day for fun, while a starving peasant would be executed for taking 1 grouse. Medieval justice was less about right and wrong and more about whether you owned a fancy hat. Archaeological evidence shows these laws didn't actually stop poaching. Researchers found that medieval villages near forests had unusually high numbers of wild animal bones hidden in trash pits, suggesting secret hunting was common despite the risks. The control over hunting was just one way nobles maintained power over commoners' lives. They also had significant control over something even more personal. Getting married today requires paperwork, but at least you can choose who to marry. Medieval folks weren't so lucky. Marriage wasn't just a personal decision. It was a legal transaction that required official permission from the people who controlled your life. For peasants living on a lord's land, marriage required their lord's approval first. Known as merchet, this rule gave lords the power to decide when and who their peasants could marry. Records from 13th century England show that peasants had to pay a fee called merchet to their lord before getting hitched. This fee varies wildly from a few chickens to an entire year's earnings. Congratulations on finding true love, That'll be 50% of everything you own, please. The reason behind this odd rule was simple: control over the workforce. When a woman married someone from another village, her lord would lose a worker. If a male peasant married, he might need more land to support a family. By requiring permission and payment, lords maintained tight control over their labor force and land use. Court records reveal how seriously this rule was taken. In one case from 1287, a peasant woman who married without permission was fined the equivalent of 6 months' wages. Her new husband had to work off the debt by providing extra labor to the lord for 2 years. The punishment wasn't just financial, it was designed to make an example of rule breakers. For noble families, marriage was even more restricted because it involved wealth and political alliances. Noble children as young as 7 years old could be legally betrothed, with marriage following when they reached 12 for girls and 14 for boys. Historical documents show that approximately 60% of noble marriages were arranged for political or financial gain, with love rarely entering the equation. "Mom, Dad, I've fallen in love." "That's nice, dear, but we've already traded you to the Duke's son for 3 castles and a strategic military alliance." Even more bizarre, in many regions, a widow couldn't remarry without permission from her dead husband's lord. Records from 1430 show that widows who remarried without permission could lose all property inherited from their first husband. Marriage restrictions weren't just annoying. They created a society where your most personal life choices were controlled by others. And if marriage was controlled, what about the other side of relationships? Medieval justice had a truly backward approach to marital affairs. If a wife cheated on her husband, guess who got in trouble? The husband. This bizarre legal concept turned victims into criminals through a set of rules we can call the cuckold laws. The word cuckold referred to a man whose wife was unfaithful. But unlike today, where cheating is a personal matter, medieval society turned it into a public legal issue. The truly strange part was that the husband was considered responsible for his wife's behavior. Some men would check their foreheads every morning for horns, the mythical symbol of a cuckold, as if infidelity would leave physical evidence overnight. No horns today? Guess my marriage is still intact. In many medieval towns, a man whose wife cheated could face legal punishment himself. Court records from 1380 in France describe a merchant who was forced to pay a fine after his wife ran off with another man. The court ruling stated that he had failed in his duty to control his wife, and therefore shared guilt for her actions. The humiliation went beyond legal penalties. In towns across Europe, a custom called charivari involved public shaming rituals for cuckolds. Neighbors would gather outside the unfortunate husband's house, banging pots and pans while singing insulting songs about his failure as a man. These events could draw crowds of hundreds. Nothing says, "I'm sorry your spouse cheated on you," like having the entire village show up to serenade you with songs about your inadequacy as a husband. Some regions took these punishments to extreme levels. In parts of Italy and France, cuckolds could be forced to ride backward on a donkey through town while wearing a special hat with horns. Town records from 1420 show that one such parade attracted over 500 spectators. The legal double standard was glaring. A husband who cheated faced minimal consequences, while a wife who did the same brought shame and punishment to her husband. Court documents from 1470 show that in many regions, a man couldn't even bring charges against his wife's lover without opening himself up to ridicule and fines. These humiliating punishments reveal how medieval law was less about actual justice and more about maintaining social order through fear and shame. Speaking of public humiliation as punishment, before television or movies, medieval people had a different kind of entertainment: public executions. These weren't hidden events, but major social gatherings held in town squares for everyone to see. Town criers announced execution dates well in advance, treating them like festival days. "What are you doing this Saturday?" "Oh, heading to town to watch 3 beheadings and a hanging. I hear they're executing a famous thief. Got front row seats." The atmosphere was shockingly festive. Food vendors sold pies and ales, musicians played in the background. Souvenir sellers offered execution memorabilia. Historical records show cities like London could draw crowds of 20,000 people for high-profile executions. Families brought children of all ages to these events. Court documents from 1526 mention a father lifting his young son onto his shoulders for a better view of a beheading. Parents believed these displays taught valuable moral lessons about breaking the law. The condemned person's final moments became theatrical performances. They were paraded through town, allowed to make speeches, and expected to show proper remorse. Execution methods were deliberately slow, designed for the audience's satisfaction rather than mercy. Wealthy viewers rented windows overlooking execution sites, paying up to 10 times a laborer's daily wage for prime viewing spots. Buildings with good views of the gallows had higher property values simply for their morbid vantage points. This strange entertainment reveals how differently medieval society viewed justice and punishment. But as odd as their entertainment choices were, hate your job? In medieval times, tough luck, you were legally stuck with it. Under the system of serfdom, peasants couldn't quit, change careers, or move away without permission. I'd like to put in my 2 weeks' notice. Great, your resignation will be processed in approximately 50 years after you're dead. After the Black Death killed nearly half of Europe in 1348, workers started asking for higher wages due to labor shortages. The nobles' response? They made it illegal to ask for more money. England passed laws that froze wages and made it a crime to refuse work at those rates. Guild rules created another layer of restrictions. These organizations controlled who could practice specific trades. Unlicensed workers caught making goods could be fined an entire year's earnings or even physically punished. Even stranger, skills were considered family property. If your father was a baker, you were legally required to become a baker too. Children as young as 7 were sent away as apprentices, bound to their masters for up to 14 years with no ability to quit. Looking back at these 10 bizarre medieval laws, it's clear that everyday life was controlled in ways that would seem completely foreign to us today.